All right, here we are. We're two guys from Mars, one guy from Ocean County, and we have a good breadth of opinion among the three of us. A little bit more on the conservative side, because Paul Bangiola is a knee-jerk liberal.
Well, it's two
But
on one, which it's two on one. In this case, that makes it even. So, okay.
so, and then Michael Carroll, former assemblyman from Morris County, and who used to drive all the other Republicans crazy by actually standing up for Republican principles.
Happily retired.
And then he retired. Boy, he's got good looking law library there.
Actually, that's not a law library, Paul. That's Library of America. That's all the stuff I never read when I was younger and have to read now that I'm going to sooner or later retire.
Yeah. All right. So,
Including right up your alley. We just got two today on Mencken.
oh yeah, well, that's something. Yeah, we were talking about tariffs, and I had done a column about a month ago when I went into my local coffee roaster in Bayhead, and he informed me coffee prices were going to skyrocket because Trump had imposed tariffs. And this guy voted for Trump, but Trump imposed big tariffs on coffee, and it didn't really. I mean, I just predicted the obvious that people would really go insane because coffee is not a food, it's a drug. You can't take it from people just like that. And sure enough, I mean, he was making this absurd argument that you can charge a huge tax for something to enter the country, but it will still be sold at the same price once it goes on sale inside the country, which just makes no sense at all. And he just said remarkably stupid stuff like that. The Walmart guy said prices would have to go up. Um, and, Trump said, no, you should just eat it. And of course, it's just the like 34%, a 34% tariff on them. Some of these things, you can't just, it's not in your profit margin. So anyhow, what was, Mike, you had some good observations on tariffs.
Well, again, I don't know if you saw it, Paul, yesterday, the New York Times had a story about how GE is now bringing a lot of its manufacturing back to the United States. Like, for example, doing sheet steel in Youngstown of all places and things like that. And, the GE is actually now owned by a Chinese conglomerate, but they see the handwriting on the wall and they're bringing a lot of their manufacturing back here, which makes perfect sense, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. But I think your observation is absolutely spot on. Why in the world would you ever put a tariff on coffee, on chocolate, on vanilla, on bananas, on things that we do not and cannot make here? That just strikes me as being foolish. And I think one of the things that the president made a mistake on was focusing on countries rather than products. I don't think Biden and Obama both did the same thing with Chinese tires, Chinese EVs, and things, Chinese chips. But they concentrated on products, and that makes a heck of a lot more sense than wandering out there into the ether and trying to put taxes on individual countries.
Yeah, well,
Paul, what do you think of it?
I think it's, I got my Rutgers shirt on, Paul, and back when I took an economics degree from Rutgers, there were a few things that were kind of axiomatic, and one of them was that progressives, liberals, even the left wing of the liberals were the ones who favored tariffs. And the right wing, they were in favor of free trade because of free enterprise and that the markets would achieve equilibrium if you left the markets to their own devices. And, the fact that the Republican Party has left aside completely the Chamber of Commerce wing and that Trump has kind of moved really into the hard left of organized labor's positions. And I think, as Michael pointed out, you could have targeted tariffs that you target for either reasons of having a geopolitical opponent involved, or by reason of a particularly egregious predatory economic opponent. And in China's case, it's both. You could focus really on China, and it would make a lot of sense. The issue with India is somewhat different because India, it's more economic than a political, geopolitical advantage you're seeking. But it's absolutely maniacal to impose tariffs across the board on every country in the world based on some idea that a tariff or a trade deficit is inherently bad. Now, wealthy countries buy things, and poor countries provide things to wealthy countries. And if they provide something good, they the wealthy country puts money into the poorer country. We're a wealthy country. And we not only are we a wealthy country, we are a wealthy country with the dominant reserve currency. The dollar is the reserve currency. Now, we have two things that work simultaneously from the president, which is a crazy tariff policy where he's tariffing Canada, our our closest ally, which whom we share. Talk about a geopolitical important ally. We share a 2,300-mile land border with Canada. It's undefended. And we're going to pick a fight with Canada to where the point where they're buying jets from Switzerland. Absolutely insane. And most of our lumber comes from Canada. But aside from that, there's so many reasons to just not pick a fight with everyone. And then you wind up being embarrassed to have to eat and claw back the tariffs like he did on, as you point out, coffee and bananas.
Well, and the thing is, too, he has these temper tantrums, like if the Brazilians, who apparently, actually, we export to them, and we're net exporters to Brazil. But because his friend was deposed as president, he wants to put 100% tariff on Brazil, and that was mentioned in the Supreme Court. That if is this a rational policy, or is this just a tantrum? And it looks like I hereby predict the court goes 9-0 against Trump's tariffs, because the three liberals will do it to screw Trump, and the six conservatives, you're making your whole career hypocritical if you say, oh, well, we believe these things should be decided by Congress like the Constitution says, except for we're making an exception for Trump.
I think Michael and I
Key
might
there,
have
Paul, is,
for
if I
different
may,
reasons. Yeah.
It's what?
is that
Yeah,
not all tariffs are created equal. And I think probably you'll get some nuance from people like Kavanaugh when they talk about national security aspects of that. But I want to come back to Canada. Paul mentioned lumber in Canada, and he's right. We get a lot of our lumber from Canada. Why? We've got virtually the same ecosystem in Washington and in Oregon and in Idaho. And there's no reason in the world why we should be importing a whole bunch of lumber from Canada. We should be employing Americans. Now, I admit that probably has more to do with screwy American eco-politics than it does with economics. But that's and another thing mentioned with India. India is one of the biggest drug compounders in the world. Now, right now, India and the United States get along okay together. But do you really want to be in a situation where if something goes south or sideways in India, you're relying for most of your prescription drugs, at least for the basic parts of them, on a country that you're not sure is going to always be on your side? There are certain things we should make here. And like, for example, prescription drugs is one of them. And I think we ran into that problem during the Wuhan crisis. We get our PPE to the extent it was necessary from China, and all of a sudden they had other priorities. So
yeah.
if we have to pay a nickel more for a mask in this country to ensure that it's made here, that's a nickel we should be paying. It's a good national security device.
Well, I think national security is going to be one of the issues. And I think the Supreme Court may go 9-0, but I'm not sure they're going to go 9-0 on the president's authority to impose tariffs. But they may go, I think they are likely to rule against him on the failure to lay a basis for determining a worldwide economic emergency or even a domestic economic emergency that justified worldwide tariffs without any kind of uh, explanation. And I think that's whether they do it on like a minor premise or they go to the whole just sweep it away. They could say this is Congress's domain. Uh, I think it is, but I think they're more
But it's
likely.
simple to say. I mean, the easy way out for them is to say, well, we're not saying we don't like tariffs. We're just saying Congress has to be consulted on it. And then,
Well, the problem is that Congress has specifically delegated certain authority over tariffs to the president. And there's where the
Well, it
nuance
was
comes.
only that crazy emergency resolution.
Well, well, part of that, but I mean, the other thing about it, I think that Paul's right, is that I think you and I, Mr. Molshine, have had these discussions about the limits of executive power in quote emergencies. We had a lot of problems with Phil Murphy deciding all of a sudden to close down the world on the grounds of an emergency. And I look at Mikey Sherrill, and I say she's coming in and promising to have an emergency for electric rates, which is nonsense. Uh, so, this may be one of the times where for whatever, for different reasons, Mr. Banjul and I agree, is that the executive authority to declare an emergency should be extremely limited.
Well, Phil Murphy, when he used to have his daily Florence Nightingale press conferences, as I like to say, and where everybody put on their goofy masks, and we meet um, in the war room, whatever the hell that is, in Trenton, and he would get up there and he always had the state police lieutenant with him, I guess, to give force to his ideas. But I asked him at press conference, I said, "Are there any limits on your power under the emergency?" And remember, his famous answer when that question was posed by someone else was that the First Amendment was beyond his pay grade. One of the worst answers in political history. That was pretty funny. But speaking of crazy people, what do you guys think of Trump's declaration that 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 congressmen who oppose him on some of these uses, military uses, are guilty of treason and not treason, sedition, and can be shot. That's only the Donald could come up
I
with
think
that
he, I
one.
think he mentioned hanging, but he definitely mentioned the death penalty. Yeah.
Did he say hanging?
Yeah, I think it was there were a couple of reckless tweets culminating in sedition, a reference to sedition, and then the death penalty was in caps. So, I don't know if he mentioned shooting. I think he did mention
Oh,
hanging.
that's right. He put it in one of his stupid posts.
Well, where to begin? Obviously, he's trying to divert attention from the Epstein fiasco and his complete demolition in that whole debate, and the fact that he was about to lose the vote for even in the Republican House to support the discharge petition, and it was going to be hundreds of defectors on the Republican side. So this is what he came up with, the latest diversion. But the equally interesting is that traditionally, or what we've seen with Trump one and Trump two, is that the Republicans will do absolutely any backbend they have to say what he said was correct. And this one is a bridge too far because the spokeswoman yesterday, Carolyn Levitt, actually misrepresented what these senators said. They said the law, which is no member of the military or a sworn member of the government has a duty, nor may they obey an illegal order. It's axiomatic, and it's based in a historical precedent that goes back to the Holocaust when the whole world agreed that illegal orders would never be a basis for somebody doing something completely horrendous and immoral ever again. And that's part of the code of military justice. It's based. So when the press spokeswoman comes out, and Stephen Miller incidentally did this too, and they came out and said that these members of Congress had suggested that that these members were suggesting that members of the military ignore lawful orders, and they actually said legal orders and totally misrepresented what was actually said. That was so obvious to even the Republicans that the speaker couldn't go there, senators couldn't go there. It was met with a really obvious refutation, and it was different. It was different.
What do you think is going to show up, in the infamous papers? Like you just pointed out, he made a last minute change to avoid embarrassment on it. And, there's two ways it can go. One is there's something in there that's really embarrassing to him that he wants to keep secret, and the other is this stuff's all been hashed out already. And where do you think it is?
My
Let, let,
theory?
let, let me go over there for a second. Paul, you just had a shot. I want to go this one. Is that my theory is that if there were anything even remotely embarrassing to Trump, let alone criminal, the extremely politicized DOJ under Garland would have leaked it long since, and they wouldn't have wasted time with Jack Smith pursuing these Chimera charges. They would have gone after him for the criminal charges there because there is, as I understand it, no statute of limitations on such things. And so if you believe that the Justice Department under Biden would have kept these things secret if they knew it could hurt Trump, that is a bridge way, way, way too far.
Okay.
Now, that said, we can speculate as to what's in them. My thought would be, as I said, if remember this guy, when did he die? 2020? Epstein, something like that. I mean, he was
Yeah,
text. Remember,
2020.
2019. Yeah.
okay, remember he was texting with Congress with Democratic Congress people while they were talking on the record, giving
Yeah.
them advice on how if he had anything on Trump, he would have said so. And the fact that all this time has been there, that nothing has come out, is pretty clear indication this is going to be Russia collusion number two.
Well,
You know,
I'm not as convinced. First of all, it's not fair to equate the Biden presidency and approach to law enforcement with the Trump approach. Trump says other people are weaponizing while he's weaponizing. But aside from that, and whether they would have done something, just to get some cheap political points, if what I think might be in these files that would have gored both sides are pictures and videos. And we don't have any of those in the public domain. There's a safe that was raided by the FBI, and we have emails, but we don't have pictures and videos that the FBI probably had as part of its investigation. Pictures from God knows where, the airplane, the island, parties. Uh, those could really involve many different people. There's been an awful, the president has spent a lot of time talking about how uh, innocent people could be affected by this.
which is as if he cares.
Well, I think people who did nothing wrong and are being swept up in this. But when you look at the lengths to which he went to send his personal attorney to Ghislaine Maxwell, and then to move her into a much cushier prison than she would ever get to as a sex offender, convicted sex offender. There's some motivator here, uh, or perhaps he's convinced that people will break the law for him and not, they'll redact. I think the biggest mistake he could make, or that could happen, is there could be an attempt to redact things in such a way that it will be so obvious to everyone that the howl will be worse than if they had just released it. I think that might be what he thinks is going to happen. That there's going to
But
be.
there's also all my female readers like hated me the other day for pointing out about that this is more of a comedy than a tragedy. And this is crude, but Epstein, it was in the New York Post, was allegedly had an egg-shaped penis, and when fully erect, it was 2 inches. Now that's embarrassing. And that was apparently a disposition,
Deposition.
deposition. Yeah, it was in a deposition, and the woman said, "Yeah, it's 2 feet, 2 inches when fully erect." And it struck. I mean, it's funny.
It's
I mean, to me, everything's funny.
well, I'm with your women friends. It's more of a tragedy than a comedy, and there's real victims here, and
I don't think if you're 21 years old and you have sex with a guy who's got things that you and I don't have, like private planes, I, you know.
there's minors involved here.
Well, they take a couple minors, and then they sort of throw that cloak over the whole crowd. But
Well,
I
we
wonder
know
what they're actually saying happened.
Well, we know Prince Andrew. So there's definitely minors involved, and and sexual activity involved between minors and grown-ups, adults, men, and uh, nobody seems to be proud of it. So I don't think there's any question that there are real victims here, and this that the fact that he got a sweetheart deal in Florida, and then that person who negotiated that sweetheart deal wound up in the Trump administration where he is now. Uh, and then he's come under fire subsequently. So there's an awful they went an awfully long way to make sure that Jeffrey Epstein didn't personally tell this story. And then, of course, we've got how he actually died and the circumstances of his death, where the video apparently right before his suicide, the hallway video goes blank for something like 25 or 30 seconds. I don't want to be wrong about the time, but there's a video that was did not show a relevant period of time right outside his cell. So there's a lot of strange things about him deciding to commit suicide in prison. So I don't know. I think there's more in that file, or the president wouldn't have fought it to the point where right before he decided they should release everything, he was having Bobbert from Colorado and Marjorie Taylor Greene. He was doing everything he could to exert leverage on them. I don't think that was for nothing.
Like
Yeah.
everything else about Trump, he's changed his mind repeatedly on that. Remember, because when he ran for office the first time, he said, "Let's release the files." And I don't know what changed, but I mean,
Well,
I like to equate it to the drones over New Jersey. And that, remember when they
yeah,
were flying over New Jersey, Trump said, "I'm going to get to the bottom of this when I get to office." And then as soon
yeah.
as he gets to office, nothing happens. So he's not one necessarily for following through on those things and being consistent. But again, I'll tell you this. After all this time, and with Trump having been in office since 2016, and with these things being kicking around for all, and with Epstein only dying in 2019, I'd be shocked if there were anything more than the occasional, perhaps. What was the one he did with the the television video, television tape? That kind of
Stormy
thing might come.
Daniels?
No, 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 no. The one with the grab him by the hair. It's that kind of thing is embarrassing, but it's not really there's no crime or anything else along those lines.
Well, with Stormy Daniels, the second time she went up to see him, expecting to have sex, he made her watch Shark Week for an hour. Now that's the kind of thing I love. We're not getting enough of that. You
That's very
know,
sexy.
well, he's apparently obsessed with sharks, and as one,
TV and TV.
yeah, and it's just that. But that is the kind of thing, the Stormy Daniels thing, that sticks with you. Even though it was, according to her, it was only about 5 minutes of actual sex and an hour of Shark Week, and so yeah, I'm very, and the one thing I had mentioned is, as a legal matter, the one thing I really disliked about the whole matter was the federal government is so powerful these days that it just throws life sentences at everybody, like Menendez. He's a little weasel, our former senator Bob Menendez, but he didn't deserve the rest of his life in prison for doing the same stuff that a lot of senators and congressmen do. And they hit people with such huge sentences that they can't mount a defense.
Well,
Well,
there's
you
something.
remember your line, Paul. I'll interrupt and then I'll let Paul go. Is you and I discussed the author of that book, Three Felonies a Day. There's
Yeah.
virtually nothing that anybody does in their lives that doesn't result in some violation of federal law on a daily basis. Again, Paul, but Angelo, this time, I don't know if you remember, if you were politically active back when, or in law school when the legislature first did the revisions of the criminal code back in the late 70s, early 80s. But they did a really good job in it. They took all the stuff and put it into 2C in one place. And then for the last 40 years, they've been taking apart their handiwork. And it's really a shame. And I think you're right, Paul Molshine, that the amount of firepower that the government can sometimes bring as a bludgeon. I mean, remember, let's take our Bridgegate case. It turns out that there was no crime there, but they managed to secure a guilty plea.
Yeah, that's right. That's a classic case. One guilty plea or two.
Well, lest I be accused of sitting in the amen corner, I'd just like to say that the federal government can be scary when it prosecutes, and it can, as you say, you can be prosecuted for things, and the prosecutor has the ability to put people in jail. He can find something that you're guilty of. And if you're dis but we have the other side of the coin, which is a virtually unreviewable power not to prosecute. And with the Trump administration now, we have a complete weaponization of the federal justice system, where he is picking political opponents by name and saying, go get them. That's your point. And on the other hand, there are people who have clearly committed offenses for which they are immune or will not be prosecuted, and it's virtually impossible to make a prosecutor prosecute. All you have to do is be a supporter of the president.
Well,
Look,
like when he's going after Comey right now.
well,
Thing is,
that
Comey
is
will
so
probably,
shocking. What happened there is beyond shocking. But that
but
the
I mean, it's going to cost them a couple $1 million to mount the defense, even though it's a
yeah.
ridiculous case.
Well, there's a name for this in civil litigation. It's called a SLAP suit, strategic litigation against public participation. And corporations were doing this, where they had somebody criticize an environmental policy or a civil rights policy or a workplace policy, and they would sue the person who brought it up and bring the might of the corporation against them. I've handled some cases like this in federal court where patent suits were filed, where you would get a letter, a small business would get a letter in the mail, and it would say, "We have a patent that we filed in 1995 that required anyone who took an electronic attachment, and sent it out electronically using email to pay us a royalty. We trademarked that." And so we're just checking in to see if you use any device that scans it. We need an independent, faithful Justice Department full of prosecutors who know that their duty is to do justice. And that means not too much penalty and not too little penalty, and certainly not politically motivated prosecutions. And that should be just axiomatic. It's in the Code of Professional Responsibility for lawyers.
I would agree with you there. And then we get Alvin Bragg and Letitia James on the phone, and we say, what? Because, I mean, if there were ever political prosecutions, what Trump faced were clearly political. They ran a campaign based upon going after him. And so,
Well,
it's the
he
fact that the fact is that as people have said, if he were not named Trump, those cases never would have been filed.
uh,
And so
he
the
he
politicization of law enforcement is nothing new.
But that is you to put that in the balance with what, for example, he decided to do with Schiff and Comey, and who's the third person? Well, he picked James, and uh, to put that in on the balance, that was a case that survived uh, beautiful legal representation up through the trial court and is on appeal right now. That's how the process works. Maybe those charges will be found to be the product of errors in the courtroom, but 12 good people decided he was guilty, and a judge did his
Wait a
job.
minute, I thought they were New York Democrats.
Well, see, there you go.
Well, let me stop you there, Paul, because
There's
12 good
lots of
people
trials in New York every day with good people sitting on jurors, and
and
it's just not
12
right to describe every who sits on a jury as a Democrat or a Republican. Having
Well,
tried,
when you run in a Democratic primary or election and you say it was a Trump primary, you're out to get a specific guy. You're not a good person. That's just
yeah,
rotten.
but you don't get to say that to the jury. That doesn't happen in a courtroom. The courtroom winnows out all of that stuff. And I say this as somebody who's tried jury cases in the most conservative county in the United States for a long time. I argued cases in front of Republicans and Democrats and independents, and they're just jurors. And that's the way it is. You don't
with
get
a
to,
politician on trial, Paul.
well, I can't say I ever prosecuted the president
Well,
of the
let's go
United
back to that, because I'm going to go back to the Bridgegate thing, where we had a jury of 12 people who convicted people of a crime that did not exist. and
Well, I think
that went up to the Supreme Court, and it was 9-0. So the
I'm
fact
trying
of
to
the matter
remember,
was,
was there a conviction or a guilty plea?
no, there was the guilty plea by Dave, and
That
a
was
conviction.
Wildstein, wasn't it?
Right, but the other two were Bridget,
Yeah.
and who's the other one, Paul?
Richard
Senator,
Kelly, and of course, what's his name himself?
yeah, the senator.
Those
So the
cases,
fact,
well, those cases take faith. Have here I'm Pollyanna, right? Have faith. Those cases were corrected on appeal. The appellate court said those were not viable prosecutions. The
all
pro-
right, counselor, roll your bones and tell me, is Trump versus, or is New York City versus Trump going to be corrected on appeal
well,
based upon what you know?
it may be correct. That's why it may not be corrected. That's what I think. I think for all the hyperbole that's directed at it, I think the case may, in fact, be substantial enough, and the evidence was substantial enough, and he deserved to be convicted, and the jury thought so. And I think the appellate court may just decide that what happened is the right thing to happen. It
And
also
sooner or
happened to him.
later,
It also happened to him in a civil case.
because that case, that's a criminal case and involves federal law, that's appealable to the United States Supreme Court. Give
Well,
me your guess, counselor. How do you think the Supreme Court, which ruled 9-0 in favor of Bridget Kelly and Senator Baroni, is going to rule on that case?
Well, I'm going to assume they're going to weigh the evidence and make a good judgment. So I think they're going to decide based on the
They
law.
won't weigh evidence. That's not what a Supreme Court does. You know
Well,
that. What it does
well,
is take the law,
they're
and the
going to
law
look
is
at
simple.
they're going to look at the record, Michael, of course.
And
Yeah.
let me ask you this other question: if you were if you were trying a case, and I'm your judge, and you find out that I've given money to your political opponent, what motion do you make?
Well, it depends. I'm not in favor of that system. I'm from New Jersey. We have a better system for picking judges and a much better judiciary. But that's the way it exists in a lot of states where judges run for political office and candidates get contributions. I don't claim it's the best system anywhere, but it
No.
exists in many states.
Running for political office, even as a judgeship, I happen to, you and I agree on this one. I think that
Yeah.
there's a lot to be said for the way New Jersey goes to pick judges, although they missed an obviously good one. Uh, the fact of the matter is that it wasn't the fact that he ran for office, the fact that he gave money to Gore, or not Gore, to Biden. And if I'm on the bench there, and I've donated money to a political opponent, if a guy's on trial before me, I don't hear that case. I recuse myself.
I think you'd have to look at maybe how much it was and when, and I don't remember. I think that came up, and the judge decided he didn't need to recuse himself because he could still call balls and strikes, which is
I know what the judge said. What do
right.
you think our Supreme, have you ever read In Ray Galkin? What do you think our Supreme Court would say about that?
Well, I don't know because it won't be presented to our Supreme Court. But when most judges I know, when presented with conflicts, they're very, very honest and forthright about. They don't want to sit on a case where they have a conflict, and if they got a problem because they know the lawyer or they know the witness or they know the parties that's going to affect their judgment, they don't sit on it. They're not dying. Why? They're not dying to get into the case to be the ones that nail the defendant. It just doesn't happen. And I don't think it happened here either. But the appellate court has it. They're going to consider all these arguments.
We will
All
soon
right,
see.
well, I
Paul, you
think
want to move?
we've gone kind of long enough here. How long did we go?
You
Well,
want to move?
I think we
I
went
thought you
longer
wanted.
than a half an hour. So it was
Well,
a
I want to do 5 minutes more if you want, because Paul, you brought up Venezuela, and I'm curious to see what our Democratic colleague has to say about that.
Oh, Venezuela. Okay. I'm a rule of law guy, and a constitutional guy. So I think that we should follow the Constitution. We don't even have something equivalent to the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which was the pretext that led to the Vietnam War debacle. So before we start engaging like a warring nation against Venezuela, the Congress of the United States should speak and authorize military force for a specific purpose in some fashion. The president, as he says, can't, as he put it last week, he can't just go kill people because he sees people in a fast boat near Venezuela, which is 25, it's like 2,000 miles from our southern border. It's a long way to be running drugs in a speedboat. I'm not sure. And the idea that the evidence is completely lacking. It's not, I'm not sure what he's trying to do, but it's a case that the executive has to make in front of the legislative branch, and it's not a partisan position.
But it's been a
Mr.
long
Mulsh,
time. I
Mr.
believe.
Mulshine, what do you think about invading Venezuela?
I think it's a good idea. You just need a good excuse. You need a better excuse, because basically they have no freedom whatsoever. The country's been destroyed by the communists. Used to be has oil reserves equal to the United States at the top of the pile. Um, so here you've got a country that's got as much oil as anywhere on Earth, and all you need is a reason to, and all you need is a pretext, you know. And if you have that pretext, it's better than screwing around in Ukraine because I've never been to Ukraine. Ever been to Ukraine? I mean,
No, but it turns out my ancestry.com just came back that I actually am Ukrainian in some sense, although how that happened, I'll never know. But I'm also from the Canary Islands, which is also something I didn't realize before.
It's
But
interesting.
I'm curious as to why we should. I mean, again, it's closer to home than Iraq, but I'm curious as to whether there's anything in Venezuela that's worth a single drop of American blood or a single American dollar.
oh, well, sure, all that oil.
We got a lot of our own, and that would just depress the price.
Well, yeah, I think we'd make a lot of money off it. It would give us a lot of power in the world. And, these guys, the problem with these communist countries, which I've covered, I've been to them, once they get in power, they can maintain control indefinitely with 20% of support of the population supporting them, as long as that 20% is well armed and well coached, which the Cubans certainly were. You go down to Cuba, nobody really wants their crappy government, but they lack the ability to get rid of it. Everybody thinks they're just, they're going to rise up and grab weapons and, you
Well,
know,
let's go there because we have what 3 million Venezuelan refugees that flooded across our border. Probably half of them are men. Let's give each one of them an M4 and send them home.
I think that you just got to figure out the right pretext, but it makes a lot more sense than it does screwing around in Ukraine, screwing around in the Middle East. Gaza, we're never going to sort that one out. Um,
Well, that's, yeah,
and that's, by the way, Trump promised that America First policy. It's not as though
yeah.
he didn't follow through.
When you get a minute, those of us on the other side noticed that promise. We're a little surprised, but uh, I think that the fact that the president has some sort of fetish about Putin and how strange his relationship with Putin has been, even lately, it makes me wonder what Putin, with his intelligence operation, what he might know about Epstein that we don't know. Maybe he knows about what happens on that island and who went to the island and all of these international figures being involved. But because it's positively weird that the president fawns over Putin and rolls out the red carpet in Alaska and says there's going to be sanctions in 2 weeks and there's never sanctions in 2 weeks over and over again. He's going to impose the sanctions, then he takes a phone call from Putin and decides not to. And he's basically at odds with our allies, NATO, even after they upped their ante and raised their stakes in the armament of Europe, the defense of Europe, just like he asked them to. He's clearly not identifying with the free nations of Europe. He's identifying with the autocrats. But
Well, I think though the big difference, the big mistake a lot of Democrats make is they assume the Cold War is still going on. Like during the Cold War, there really was a worldwide communist attempt, conspiracy, whatever you want to call it, to take over the world. And as late as 1987, I was in Mexico City, and the communists there were still thinking they were going to take Nicaragua, roll up through Salvador and Guatemala, and free Mexico. They really believed that. They were committed to that. And that was a real threat. Whereas, basically the whole
So,
Ukraine
so,
thing.
so what happened to Putin in 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell through 1991, which he described as the fall of the Soviet Union as the worst day in his life? Wasn't he, as a KGB colonel, kind of a communist? I mean, did he go through some sort of
Well,
remarkable,
he just has.
transfiguration?
He no longer has, people running around. on the Mexican on our southern border. He had people running around on our southern border organizing to invade us.
He has
He's
internet
I mean
trolls now.
the communist.
Now he has internet trolls and algorithms. That's how he's invaded us. And that's the thing that caught us unaware when Trump ran for office in 2016. That's what we as a country were not ready for is the
Actually, what the Russians did in 2016 was to gin up identity politics online because they know that's the most destructive thing for this country. And
well,
so
I
our
don't
the Chinese did
disagree. I don't
the Chinese
disagree.
did the Chinese did the same thing. And this us versus them philosophy has got to stop. And let's put it this way: it isn't our side of the aisle that's got that problem, Paul.
No, it's both sides, and it's definitely, I mean, we this argument that I've been hearing that most of it comes from the left. Well, you have to remember the attack on Paul Pelosi, the attack on the governor of Pennsylvania, the attack on the legislators in Minnesota. These were not, whether these, we could say they're all deranged people who are suffering from mental illness, but in these cases, we also had the attack that the plan to kidnap and rape the governor of Michigan, Whitmer. These were not isolated incidents. It's part of a toxic environment. And those are just examples from the other side that get omitted when this narrative comes out about how the left is the one that's promoting political violence. The truth is, everybody in politics has to be more responsible about the way they talk. That brings us full circle to the president saying people needed to be hanged for suggesting that members of the military can't obey unlawful orders. That's really out of bounds speech because that
I
kind of
would not disagree with you, but the simple fact of the matter is then it would be nice if everybody in the on not on your side of the aisle necessarily, but everybody who had a D after their name lose the words Nazi, fascist, racist, homophobe, sexist, misogynist, and such.
well,
Lose all those lines
Well,
from their.
unfortunately, that I'm going to object to that. Unfortunately, those words have meaning, and you don't get to sanitize the language that Democrats can use any more than we get to sanitize the language that conservatives can use.
But it's not true. When they use the word racist, they I don't know what they mean. They certainly don't mean people who prefer one race over another. In fact, I had an argue with one of our liberal editors who was saying, that Trump was a racist. And I said, what race is he against? They said, look what he's doing to the Mexicans. I said, the Mexicans aren't a race. What is it? Were you born yesterday? The race, and he actually was born yesterday. But the
Well,
idea that the Mexicans are a race, I mean, Mexico has people of all different races. They got blonde people, they got redhead people, they got
well,
Indians
I,
who
you know,
have a right to be pissed.
that was a long list of forbidden words that Mike just read out, and I'm just going to say that words have meaning and they have to be used carefully. And
Well,
there is
insult
such a
word.
thing. There is such a thing as racism. There is such a thing as fascism. There is such a thing as authoritarianism. They all have meanings, and when the shoe fits, you have to make sure people wear them. And sometimes,
You're right. You're right about those things all exist at once. And the simple fact of the matter is that in my political career, and I've been spanning it a heck of a lot longer than most of these other people around who are using that word. I never met a fascist, not once. Never met an authoritarian. I met communists. I met socialists, but I never met a fascist.
well, I don't know. Have you met Trump? Because Trump is an authoritarian, and all of the signs are present that the president is intent upon not leaving office this time, if possible, just like he didn't leave office last time, or not surrendering power, not losing the congressional elections by any means necessary, for example, rigging the congressional maps in Texas, rigging the congressional maps in any state where he controls the legislature instead of like having a fair election. We really don't know on the Democratic side what went on in Pennsylvania, where Elon Musk went in there and offered $1 million per people to sign a petition in favor of Trump. Remember, he offered $1 million prize to someone as sweepstakes as long as you sign the petition. And then he's the one who managed the voter lists in Pennsylvania. There's a lot to be concerned about to make sure we have uh, fair elections that we can all accept. Uh, the president of the United States not accepting the outcome of the 2020 election and then pardoning everybody who crashed the Capitol to interfere on January 6th, those are two of the most heinous acts in American history. No matter what is ever said about him in the future, he will never live those down, and no one who persists in saying that those two things aren't what they were will ever be able to live them down either. That's my
All right, that's going to be the final word.